Okay.
Okay. How do, yeah,
Okay, just share screen.
right?
Okay, and then you're gonna pick the PowerPoint.
Uh-huh. Did I do it?
Okay, you gotta go, we need to go back because you need to actually hit share at the bottom.
It says I am screen sharing.
Okay,
We can see it. It's in,
so then go up here to view and go to slideshow.
Full screen,
Um,
present.
Yeah, do present mode.
Okay. Can everybody see the screen, title screen?
yes.
Okay. Okay. My name is Dana Mossman Tepper. I'm the art conservator here at the ASU Art Museum. I'm speaking from the museum itself, which sits on the Tempe campus on the ancestral homelands of the Akimel, Aruam, and Peeposh peoples. Hang on, Andrea left, and I'm not sure how to advance these. Okay.
There you
Oops. Okay. Heather Langberry spoke about O'Keeffe's life and her body of work at the first presentation in the Masterpieces at Midday series last year. Although best known for her oil paintings, especially of flowers, O'Keeffe also executed hundreds of works on paper, including drawings in charcoal, watercolor, and pastel, and she filled books with pencil sketches. The brown sketchbook with deceivingly simple graphite sketches, mostly in contour. I also love this one, New Mexico. O'Keeffe made a series of abstract charcoal drawings and sent them to a friend in New York City who, without O'Keeffe's knowledge, took them down to Gallery 291 and showed them to well-known photographer and gallery owner, Alfred Stieglitz. He loved them. In 1915, Stieglitz placed them in one of his exhibitions at his gallery, apparently without her consent or her knowledge. A more finished example about 20 years later in her body of work. Early on, O'Keeffe used watercolor to work out ideas, compositions, and use of color for her oil paintings. And here, a watercolor from the 1970s, about 50 years later. She later replaced watercolor with pastel for her preparatory work. She also, though, used pastel for finished drawings. O'Keeffe was very intentional in her approach to making art. She was incredibly talented, having taken art classes from the age of 10. Yet she approached artist materials with the goal of mastery, honing her skills in craft, and creating her version of perfect balance and harmony in composition, surface quality, and color. These qualities would make her an excellent art conservator, and I'd like to focus for a minute on her strong commitment to preservation and her relationship with the field of art conservation. The ASU Art Museum owns an oil painting by Georgia O'Keeffe titled Horse's Skull on Blue. Dated 1930, the painting was executed within the first few summers that Georgia started visiting and painting in New Mexico. And this overall view of the painting unframed was taken in raking light, where the light came across the surface at an angle so that the topography could be more visible for examination. And so that is why you see a lot more detail in the surface in this particular view. Beautifully rendered, it showcases O'Keeffe's lushy brushwork, the controlled consistency of her paints, and her refined use of color. And here are some examples of her brushwork, the thick consistency of her paint that she controlled very carefully. Credit for much of the detail within this presentation goes to the Conservation Department at the O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which has generously shared the results of their extensive research into O'Keeffe's working practices. Correspondence in her archives indicates O'Keeffe recognized the fragility of her pristinely painted surfaces and the importance of protecting them from damage. From the outset of her career, O'Keeffe insisted on protective glass covering for her paintings and drawings. This was highly unusual. Exhibition installation photographs of an exhibition in 1923, organized again by Alfred Stieglitz at the Anderson Galleries this time, of 100 of her paintings and drawings, showed that all of the frames included a sheet of glass. Unfortunately, I could not locate a photograph of that particular exhibition, but it would have looked something like this. O'Keeffe worked very closely with the Manhattan artist and picture framer George F. Off, that's spelled O-F, to design and create frames that met her exacting aesthetic specifications and provided protection for her oil paintings and pastel drawings. The frames were fabricated and finished in Off's shop located at 126 West 57th Street in New York. There are no extant photographs of his shop, unfortunately. O'Keeffe and George Off worked together from somewhere around 1916 when she developed her relationship with Alfred Stieglitz until Off's death in 1954. He was a favorite of Alfred Stieglitz and made frames for many of the artists in the Stieglitz circle, like Arthur Dove, Charles Demuth, Marsden Hartley, and many others. And here's a photograph of the framed painting, Horse's Skull on Blue, in the conservation lab, and an intern examining the surface and looking at the paint. The frame profile for Horse's Skull in Blue is called the clamshell with a metal wrap. The clamshell profile consists of a wood base, and the sides of a clamshell frame slope inward toward the painting. Each side is half of an arch that peaks at the inner edge where the frame meets the canvas. As designed by O'Keeffe and George Off, the clamshell's original wood base had a rabbet that was so thin that it would crack under the weight of the glass, which we know she insisted upon. And I just put this up here to demonstrate, or just to show where the rabbet, what a rabbet is. And this is a cross-section of a frame profile. By wrapping the wood in metal, George Off was attempting to strengthen an inherently weakish wood clamshell profile. some clamshells off-wrapped in copper sheeting and left them as is. He went on and plated the copper sheeting with chrome for 6 of O'Keeffe's frames. Ours is one of the 6 frames with a polished chrome wrap, making it rather special. O'Keeffe was very intentional, and the surfaces of her finished paintings and pastel drawings were pristine and precisely finished. She lamented the handling damage that her artwork routinely sustained once it left her studio. Damage included fingerprints, grime, pollutants, silt, tears, punctures, scratches, and scrapes as the paintings were transported and installed for exhibitions. And she was not afraid to destroy work that became damaged or imperfect. The catalogue raisonné identifies 35 works in her personal collection that she eventually destroyed. And in high school, boarding school, she was found on several occasions burning her artwork that she felt was just inferior and not quite up to snuff. In 1946, so moving forward quite a bit, 1946, the year that Stieglitz died, the Museum of Modern Art was preparing a retrospective of O'Keeffe's work and had gathered together paintings from numerous collections. A friend of Stieglitz's had badly cleaned and varnished one of those pieces so that the paint surface went from matte and flat, like ours, to glossy and highly saturated. Accounts have it that she ordered the painting destroyed, but the curator convinced O'Keeffe to at least discuss the problem with a New York conservator named Caroline Keck. Caroline and her husband Sheldon Keck were groundbreaking in their approach to treating and restoring artwork. Their modern practice of conservation took the approach of do no harm and insisted on conservation measures that did not alter, confuse, obscure, or damage any original material applied by the artist. A work of art should not be treated in any way that might alter the original visual properties of the work. The Kecks insisted on using materials and techniques that were easily reversible and thoroughly tested. Modern conservation practice was to be as concerned with preventing damage as repairing damage. Professional conservators were obligated to fully disclose and document the materials and techniques used to treat artworks. These tenets are the cornerstone of contemporary professional art conservation practices. It is no surprise that Caroline and Sheldon Keck went on to found the conservation training program at the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU in 1960. And then later in the 70s, another graduate training program in Cooperstown, New York. These programs represent 2 of the 3 graduate programs for conservation of fine art in the US today, and each graduate 10 conservators per year. This initial meeting turned into a 40-year collaboration and friendship that lasted until O'Keeffe passed away in 1986. Caroline Keck was 22 years younger than O'Keeffe, but they had a lot in common, including much older husbands or spouses, and spouses who were either better known than they were or who were more likely to make the decisions in their families. The 2 exchanged hundreds of letters, many of which are now in the archive at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum and at the Abiquiu Foundation, one of her homes in New Mexico. Both women were opinionated, outspoken, and enjoyed disagreeing with one another in a very salty fashion. Yet O'Keeffe trusted Keck to be able to read the language of O'Keeffe's materials and techniques, preferences, and her intentions. And Keck, she really got Georgia in a way that many others did not. The letters document what could be one of the earliest long-term collaborations between an artist and a conservator. It was professional. Their friendship, their relationship was professional and personal. While our clamshell frame encasing Horse's skull on blue remains structurally stable and continues to protect the surface of the painting, the chrome surface of the frame is corroded. That's called pitting when it's spot-wise like that, as you see up here. And the chrome is flaking away from the copper sheeting. Small minor damages like dents are also apparent, and it's time for the original frame to be retired. We'll have a reproduction travel frame with the same profile constructed, in which the painting will be stored and will travel when loaned to other museums for inclusion in an exhibition. The original frame, which is as much an artwork by Georgia O'Keeffe as her painting, will be properly housed and stored and displayed alongside the painting in its new frame when it exhibited here at the ASU Art Museum. A reproduction clamshell profile frame will be constructed of basswood, a lighter weight and stronger wood than that used by George Off in his original frame making. It will be cut with a deeper rabbet so it doesn't crack, and it will be gilded with aluminum nickel leaf, which helps prevent corrosion, rather than 12K, which is the term used for gold leaf that is 50% gold and the rest usually silver. This combination reacts readily with oxidants in the environment and tarnishes fairly quickly. Keck thought O'Keeffe highly proficient technically, Conservator Keck, that is, but didn't agree with all of her practices. And I leave you with this quote, because I think this is just very exemplary of their exchanges and the respect they had for one another and the trust that they had in one another. And that is the end. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana. I'm gonna be selfish and start with a question. It seems like from what you shared, O'Keeffe, knew about these processes. So was there ever consideration that she wanted the frame to tarnish, or did she want it to stay, that crisp silver tone?
She was very deliberate in all of her choices. And while I haven't read all of the letters in her archive, and I didn't discuss this with the conservator, with Dale, it seems highly unlikely that she would have wanted her frames to tarnish. She was very particular about the finish on almost everything she produced. So I doubt she would have been hoping for the aging tarnished look. Both the wood or the gilding on the wood frames themselves, or the pitting that we see on our particular metal wrapped frame. I think she understood that it happened, that the corrosion occurred and damage to her paintings was inevitable, but it sounds like she did everything that she could to prevent any damage, or if there was anything she could control, she did.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Love that. I relate to that.
I know. That's why I think she'd be such a good conservator.
Right? Mary Beth has a question. She says, if you could have a conservator slash artist relationship like Keck and O'Keefe, what artist would it be with?
Oh, wow. um, hmm. Mary Beth, I'm gonna have to think on that and get back to you. Because at this point, it still might be somebody, an artist that's no longer living. I really enjoy the relationships I'm developing with the artists represented either in our programming or in the works that we acquire here at the museum. And the more I learn about a particular artist, the more I enjoy their work, typically. So I think I'd have to think about that pretty carefully. I'll have to get back to you, Mary Beth.
Awesome. And then Bobby asks, he says, thank you for showing the details of Horse's skull on blue. And then he asks, when you're making the new frame, does it have to be wood with metal wrapping, or can it be a more modern material?
I think that that's a really good question. And there's nothing to prevent it from being a more modern material. And I'm not sure that the reproduction travel frame that we will have constructed will actually be wrapped in metal. I think that we will probably go with the clamshell wood frame that is gilded, in part because the O'Keefe Museum is making the reproduction travel frames and based on her original profiles. But there's no reason to think it couldn't be made out of something other than wood. Particularly if it were dimensionally stable and could be easily carved and the surface could be gilded or painted to look like the original frames.
Very cool.
Thanks, Bobby. That was a great question.
Amanda asks, how do you approach conserving other works when the artist didn't leave as much information or no information at all?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. I mean, your experience and what research you can gather and asking colleagues and investigating and trying to put yourself in the mind of the artist, that's all part of the process of coming up with a treatment plan and figuring out how far to take a treatment or what materials to use in the treatment, particularly in the aesthetic side of it. So if any inpainting needs to be done or if any fabrication needs to be done or losses filled. So you really research when the artist is no longer living or if they've provided no specific information or intention. So our field is fairly small, and talking to each other, it's very helpful to reach out to other museums and conservators in private practice who have worked on pieces by the same artist.
And Dana, I'm gonna toot your horn for you because I remember when I was in school for my master's degree, we had a conservator come talk to us, and the amount of schooling you have to go through and like the chemistry and all of that, I was wondering if you could share with us a bit about that process and what it takes to have this role because it is such a small field.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I would say that the training for a conservator is pretty analogous to the training for a medical doctor. So there are prerequisites, like, okay, so you get an undergraduate degree. I don't think it really matters what you major in. However, there are some very specific requirements that medical schools ask for in terms of specific classes, and the same goes for the graduate programs in art conservation. You typically have a certain number of hours that you need to have put into a conservation lab or in some related activity, working in a variety of different, um, uh, with the different specialists, and also in different environments. And that is the same for medical school as well. You have to take a standardized test. You go and you have interviews. Unlike a doctor, though, you have to take your portfolio with you and you present it. Then once you're in graduate school, you have summer internships. You have a placement for your third year of graduate school that is on site in an institution or with a private practitioner. And I think it's fairly typical now for folks who graduate, for conservator graduates, to actually take on a postgraduate fellowship as well. So by the time you are done, you've invested, you know, a good long time in your education. So by the time I got my first real paycheck, I was probably 30. So that's not to say that that's right, that that is fair, because it really is not. I think it's a problem that the field generally is really grappling with, which is how to make the training more equitably available for students, for interested students.
That's so cool. So you're an art doctor.
I guess I'm an art doctor.
I love that.
And you can be a general practitioner. I'm the only conservator in our art museum, so I have to wear a lot of different hats, much like a general practitioner. But then there are times when I can practice my trained specialty, which is works of art on paper and photographs, and then I'm often acting as a surgeon. So, you know, there are students in graduate school do specialize fairly early, similar to medical students.
Do you have a favorite piece in our permanent collection that you've worked with or on? How would you frame it?
How would I frame it?
I work with this, or I work on this. Do you?
Well, it depends on what capacity. Okay. I would say work with.
Okay, cool.
But you can, there's a drawing that by R.C. Gorman that that I really am very fond of. It's actually a sketch in pencil, colored pencils, and maybe some watercolor. And it was pulled out of a spiral notebook, a larger spiral bound sketch pad. And whenever I think about our collection, that is the piece that comes to mind for me. It's a gem. It is, and it reveals a lot about the hand of the artist, which is something that's very appealing to me. I really love that.
That's so cool. I'm gonna turn it over to anyone else because I've been monopolizing questions. Does anyone else have any more questions? Oh, here we go. Amanda, any practical tips for people who have artwork or photographs at home to help them stay nice for as long as possible? Do you need to go to a professional framer?
I think it depends on if you want to display the family photographs or your heirlooms or your artwork. If you want to store it and store it carefully so that it doesn't get damaged during the storage period, then no, you definitely don't have to go see a framer. If you do want to display and you want to have something framed, there are certain requests that I would recommend making of the framer and asking them prior to committing to having them make the frame or do the framing. But again, that depends in part on how significant the piece is to you and how much you want to invest in the process. So at home, at our house, we have some works that we've really are incredibly important and significant to us. So those I can do myself, or I can take to a really qualified framer that I trust to basically do things the way I would do them. Hinging, mat cutting, materials that they use. But we also have works in our home that are framed that aren't as significant to us or don't have as much meaning or aren't as valuable. And so there are times when we would just pick up a frame from and whatever mat came with it, and we use that. We've used that from Michael's. Not to say that Michael's can't also do a really good framing job, but you do need to know what to ask for. And if anybody's interested, and I'm happy to send out some written information and guidelines.
I think that would be great. And maybe we can share on social media too. The tips I think would be nice. We have time for a few more questions. I want to encourage the audience. This is a great opportunity. Again, Dana's very humble, but it does take a lot of schooling and commitment to, have this role. So I want to encourage everyone to take this opportunity to ask her questions. So we'll leave it open for a second.
You're also welcome to drop by the lab and or send me an email, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, so if there aren't any more questions, as Dana said, feel free to stop by and see her at the museum. You will need to schedule a spot on our Eventbrite, so you can follow us on our social medias, check out our website to figure out how to schedule a time. We will have another masterpiece at midday this Thursday with Andrea Feller. And so Dana, I do want to say thank you so much for your time. We're very lucky to have you as a resource and a colleague at the museum. It's really wonderful to watch you work and take care of our pieces. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate everyone else's time. Thank you for joining us. And we will see you on Thursday.
Thanks, Kat.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.